Now, the skeptic's response to all this is, okay, it's not cultural, but it's due to your own personal psychological makeup. Obviously, NDEers are delusional. They're talking about things that don't exist. This is a personal interest of mine because I'm a psychiatrist. And I've dealt for the last 4 decades with people who are delusional, who have trouble telling reality from fantasy. So I've been looking at whether NDEers are in fact delusional. It's not a clear-cut answer. NDEers certainly have emotional problems. We like to talk about the positive after effects. There are negative after effects too. There are a lot of intrapersonal problems within yourself, the altered beliefs and values and attitudes. Sometimes people doubt their own sanity after an NDE. They constrict because they're afraid of being rejected or ridiculed. Some people feel anger or depression that hasn't been returned against their will. They also have problems dealing with other people. They sometimes feel removed or alienated from people who haven't had NDEs. They have difficulty resuming the social roles they had before the NDE. They find it hard to communicate the experience to others. And sometimes, when they've had unconditional love in the other world, they can't be satisfied with the conditional love we have here. It makes it very hard to have relationships. So there are reasons to suspect that NDEers are emotionally ill. They have problems. So what does this mean? Well, various people have suggested different psychiatric diagnoses for NDEers. And things you hear most common are things like dissociation, post-traumatic stress disorder, brief psychotic disorders. All these things have something that overlaps with NDEs and their after effects. But let me give you an analogy. Imagine that you grew up with dogs, but you've never seen or heard of a cat. And I'm telling you about my pet, who was a cat. I'll tell you, this is a small, furry animal that likes to be petted, that grins out of a dish. It's got 4 legs. And you say, oh yeah, I know that, that's a dog. Well, if all you know is dogs, that's what you're going to hear. But if I show you other things about the dogs and cats, I can show you there are differences. Dogs bark. Cats don't. They meow. Dogs wag their tail when they're happy. Cats don't. They purr. And so forth. There's a core similarity. They both have 4 legs. They both like to be petted. They're both furry. But there are differences also. It's the same thing with mental illness and near-death experiencers. Both groups see things that other people don't. They have strange beliefs. They have changed social roles. So if all you know is mental illness, you could say, yes, they fit that pattern. But people with mental illness become more fearful as a result of the illness, whereas NDEers generally become more joyful. People with mental illness change when you give them drugs. People with NDEs do not. People with mental illness simply become more self-absorbed. NDEers become more outward absorbed, more altruistic. And it goes on and on. So if you just look at the overlap, you can see that NDEers look like people with mental illness. If you look at the whole picture, there are definite differences. Now, how can you tell if NDEers are psychotic? Psychotic people often hear voices. So do NDEers. Mitch Leister, a psychiatrist in Colorado, I did a study of NDEers who claim to still hear voices after their NDE. Now, this is usually considered by psychiatrists to be a sign of mental illness. But in fact, a lot of leaders of our culture, going back centuries, have talked about hearing guided voices. People like Winston Churchill, who weren't usually considered psychotic, heard voices and were guided by them. And so do a lot of NDEers. We took a scale that had been used in a sample of schizophrenic patients that asked them 30 different questions about how they related to their voices. And we gave the same questions to near-death experiencers about how they related to their voices. I'm not going to show you all 30 questions. I'll just show you one to show you the difference. The NDEers are the left-hand bars, and the schizophrenics are the right-hand bars, the darker ones. And the first question on the left is, do you want to keep hearing the voice? And the other question on the right is, would you want to control it if you could? Or would you want to hear it if you could control it? And the NDEers, overwhelmingly, almost 90%, wanted to keep hearing the voice. And virtually none of the schizophrenics did. And this is true across the board with all 30 questions. NDEers said, the voices help me, they get me through life, they comfort me, they support me. The schizophrenics repeatedly said, they frighten me, they interfere with my functioning, I don't want them around. So we have evidence that although NDEers may hear things other people don't, they don't relate to them in a psychotic way the way psychotic patients do. This is a graph of the responses of patients in a psychiatric clinic, people with diagnosed psychiatric disorders. And I looked at those who had been close to death. And this is data from the SCL-90, Symptom Checklist 90. So it says checklist of 90 different symptoms of psychological distress. And it has 10 different scales and then 3 different global scales on the right. On every single scale, those people who had an NDE when they came close to death had less distress than those people who didn't have an NDE. No matter what measure you used, it was consistent. Having an NDE makes you able to handle the stressor with less distress than if you didn't have the NDE. So far from being a sign of mental illness, NDEs seem to give some protection against mental illness.